Hello, everyone. Nice to see you all at 4 o'clock on a Wednesday. This is impressive. Thank you. All right, well, welcome to today's presentation. This is part of our Benjamin A. Botkin lecture series. This series allows us to highlight the work of leading voices in the disciplines of folklore, ethnomusicology, oral history, and cultural documentation. Each lecture is recorded and will become part of the library's collection and publicly available online at our website. In fact, now would be a good time to remind you all to turn off your phones and other electronic devices so you don't make this recording in ways that you don't want to. All right, so today we have the honor to introduce you to the distinguished photo documentarian, Martha Cooper. Visual images make up a significant portion of AFC's archival collections, and some of the very best of them are by Marty Cooper. She spent decades documenting contemporary culture throughout the world. She's worked closely with folklorists throughout her career, which you'll hear a lot more about later. She's especially well known for her urban photography that depicts hip-hop culture, children's play, mural arts, come on in, community celebrations, and innumerable other topics. She was one of the first photographers to document the rise of hip-hop culture in the 1970s, and her groundbreaking 1984 book with Henry Chalfant on the New York City graffiti subway art has been called the Graffiti Bible. She has also worked on international projects, rule projects, many exhibits and publications. In 2019, she herself was the subject of a documentary called Martha, A Picture Story. All right, so today, Martha will share some of her favorite photographs, discuss her projects and approaches, and reflections. So please join me in welcoming her to the library.
Hi. Hi, thanks for coming. I'm not a folklorist, but I'm going to try to talk a little bit about folklore. The first thing I did was I had to Google what folk life was, since we're in the Folk Life Center, and the definition that I came up with was the traditions, activities, skills, and products, such as handicrafts, of a particular people or group. And I felt that pretty much applied to all the pictures I had ever taken, so then I felt a little more secure about giving this talk. I'm going to tell you a little bit about how I got to start documenting the subjects that I do document. I was born in 1943 in Baltimore. My dad and my uncle had a camera store called the Cooper's Camera Mart in Baltimore for over 60 years. And my dad gave me a camera when I was in nursery school. And he used to take me out with the Baltimore Camera Club every weekend just to go looking for pictures. And that's pretty much what I thought photography was. I didn't think it was an art form. I wasn't into setting up pictures. I was just into going out and looking around and seeing what I could find. And he would develop them in his darkroom and print them for me. And my mother was an English and journalism teacher. So from her, I guess I kind of got the more journalistic side of my approach. So my approach, as it were, is simply a very straightforward taking of pictures. That's the kind of photograph that I like. I don't like particularly extreme angles. I'm not really looking for dramatic lighting, for example. I'm looking more for interesting subject matter, and I'm trying to document it in a way that I can show other people what I saw. And I guess that pretty much coincides with what folklore is. So that worked well. This is just a little bit more about my growing up. That's me taking a picture of the camera club in high school and a picture of a hula hoop contest at Mondawmin Mall in the 50s when hula hoops were just developed, were something new and exciting. Here's a picture of my cousin Sally, who's in the audience over here, and I at We are at summer camp taking pictures of each other, and you can see we have pretty sophisticated cameras because my father always supplied us with cameras that were probably just a little more complicated than we actually knew how to use. But here we are. And here's a picture I took of Sally, and it won an honorable mention in a national Kodak High School contest in 1958. And I think that this really encouraged me to be a photographer, winning this contest. Not winning, getting an honorable mention in this contest. I went to college in Iowa at Grinnell, and I majored in art, but I did not take any, there were no photography courses, but I was still interested in taking pictures. And after college, I joined the Peace Corps, and I was stationed in northwest Thailand, where I used to hike into the hill tribes and take pictures. I'm standing there, I'm holding a Nikon camera in an old-fashioned leather case there. And I met some anthropologists in a village, and they encouraged me to apply for graduate work in anthropology, which I had never really considered before. And I applied to Oxford to a one-year graduate program in ethnology and was accepted. And so I headed there, but first I bought a motorcycle, and I drove it from Thailand to England. Which, if you now today Google hippie trail, you will see that there were a lot of people going back and forth along this one particular route at that time. Here I am driving my motorbike through Afghanistan. But why I'm showing this picture is that the picture of the little boy with a hoop is the sort of picture that I might take today, and it was maybe one of the first pictures that I took of children's play. And I'll be talking about that more, but I've taken many other pictures. So it was interesting for me to find this picture in my files and realize that even when I wasn't really thinking about how I was going to be a photographer, but this picture fits into my work very well now. So anyway, I did go to Oxford, and I worked for a year at the Peabody Museum at Yale in the anthropology department, and I found out that I was really bored sitting there in the museum. I wanted to be out in the field, and one day somebody came to borrow a trepanned skull from the museum collection. This is a Peruvian skull that shows evidence of healing, where there had been some kind of operation on the skull. And I talked to him about being an intern at National Geographic, and he took a little portfolio I had, and they invited me to be an intern. So I quit the job at the museum. I gave up the idea of being, I thought I'd be an anthropology curator. I gave that up. And I went and I was an intern at National Geographic for a summer. And this is one of the pictures that I took in Washington, D.C. that summer, 1968. And you can see it's got some graffiti on it. So again, I found this picture in my files, and I realized that this was something that had caught my eye way earlier than when I started really documenting graffiti. So after that summer at Geographic, I thought I wanted to be a National Geographic photographer, and I proposed a story about the Ifugao rice terraces in the Philippines, because I had met Harold Conklin, who was an anthropologist and had done work there. And they gave me some support, and I went off to the Philippines, and I photographed this story, and I wrote the story, and they didn't use it. And this was very disappointing at the time, heartbreaking actually. But when I look at these pictures, I realize that I think most anthropologists or folklorists would like them, because those are the kinds of pictures that I was taking for those anthropology projects. Like the little boy on the right is learning how to climb a ladder, because the ladders to the houses, in order to get into these houses in the Philippines, you had to climb a ladder like that. And again, the kids, you can see kids playing, and also learning. The little boy on the top left is the son of the village blacksmith, and he's learning how to file with a tool. So this is definitely a transmission of culture picture. So I like these pictures, even if Geographic didn't. And Plan B, I got married to an anthropologist, which was a lot easier than getting my own PhD. And and we went and lived in Japan while he did his field work in Japan, and I tried to get my photography career going. And while I was in Japan, I photographed a lot of festivals and a lot of Japanese traditional crafts, such as this umbrella maker with a handmade paper. And I also photographed people on the subway, which later became an interest of mine. So, and at one of the festivals, I saw this man with a tattoo and was intrigued by this because I had never seen this kind of tattoo. And I wound up doing a big project on Japanese tattooing, which is all done by hand, and which at the time was really an underground culture, not talked about much. Most people didn't know about it. I tried very hard to get these pictures published, and nobody was interested in publishing them. However, 40 years later, I was able to publish this book about Japanese tattooing, and now this kind of tattooing is all over the place, especially in New York. I see so many people with Japanese-style tattoos. So things have changed over the years. And that book is sitting over there on the table if you want to have a look. We moved to Rhode Island because my then husband got a job at the University of Rhode Island, and I got a job at the Narragansett Times as a staff photographer, and continued to take similar pictures, like this one of kids on the bike. But I felt that was too small town for me, and I wanted, all the publishers were in New York City, and I really wanted to be in New York City, so I went to New York City. And I was able to get a job with the New York Post. I was the first woman on the staff, and we were sent out on all different kinds of assignments, but what I most liked to do was just go around and look for pictures, the way I always was doing from childhood. And there was a space in the paper for these kinds of feature photos, so that kind of became my specialty. And while I was on vacation from the New York Post, I went to Haiti, and I saw these kids that had made their own toys. Here's a picture. This little boy was making kites. The little boy on the left made a little cart, and there were fruits for wheels. And I decided that when I came back to New York, I would look for similar subject matter. So when I was still working for the newspaper, and every day I would drive through Alphabet City, which is, if you know about New York, it's avenues A, B, C, and D, on my way down to the Post, which was on South Street. And these are the photographs that I would take, that I found. At the time, the Lower East Side, which is now the very trendy East Village, was just full of vacant lots and vacant buildings, and people were afraid to go there. But I found it really a wonderful place to take pictures, and there were many kids that were just out there playing without their parents' supervision. For example, these kids are in they had a clubhouse in an abandoned building, riding on the back of a bus. And this little boy had a pigeon coop on the roof of an abandoned building. And sometimes I would see the same kids day after day. And this same boy, his name was Edwin Serrano, showed me his notebook and explained to me that he was practicing to put his name on a wall. And this was the first time that I understood that the graffiti that I was seeing was actually nicknames. And the idea that he was planning it was incredibly intriguing to me, that he was actually a designer and he was designing his name to write on a wall. And he said, "Why don't you take pictures of graffiti?" He said, "I can introduce you to a king." And so, of course, I had to say yes. And he introduced me to Dondi, who was, in fact, considered one of the most amazing graffiti writers of all time. And here I am. This is a picture of me on the. I took a friend with me because I was kind of afraid that really they were going to steal my equipment or something. And she took the picture. On the right, I'm interviewing Dondi, and Dondi and his friends in his basement. And Dondi was so articulate and so interesting about what he did that I pursued this. And one of the reasons that Dondi trusted me was that when I met him, he had clipped out of the post a picture that I had taken that had a piece of graffiti on it that he had written on the wall, in the back, the wall behind this little girl who's swinging on the swing. Of course, he wasn't interested in the little girl. He was interested in his graffiti. It says CIA on it. That was his crew. The crew was Crazy Inside Artists. And that was just so amazing to me that you could even identify that little piece of graffiti. It hadn't really occurred to me that people were noticing who had painted what. And it turned out that, of course, all the graffiti writers could identify exactly the tags and the pieces that the writers had done. And so I spent some time with Dondi. Here I am in his room with his friends as they're designing pieces to put on the subway. And Dondi has a photo album that had pictures that he had taken with disposable cameras that he had managed to obtain from wherever. And he said that he never would do a piece on a train without a photo. And that's how I fit into this culture. I was able to provide better photos than they could take themselves. And in fact, the photo was always the proof of the piece, because the pieces that they painted on trains did not last long. I mean, sometimes they only lasted one day. So if you didn't have a picture of it, you could just talk about it. So this is another in his room. So I went to the yards with Dondi. I spent a night in the yards, and this is the piece that he painted that night. There's even an MC on it for me, Martha Cooper. You can see on the D. And I became obsessed with graffiti. And I had to quit the job at the Post, which was a very good union job. But I didn't have enough time to spend. I started going up to the South Bronx, where the trains ran above ground. This is what the South Bronx looked like at the time. It was a totally devastated area. Looked like a war zone, full of abandoned buildings, but vast open lots, which did give a good view of passing trains. So I would go up there and wait for hours for trains to come by. Like I never knew which ones. And you can see this first train, it's a Blade piece. Blade was another king. And you can see how they've already scrubbed the first window, which was the conductor's window. And like the next day, all the rest of the windows would probably be cleaned, and then the rest of the trains. So if you didn't catch these trains on the first couple of days, chances are, and if they weren't cleaned, other writers might go over them. So the challenge was to get these pictures. Here's another. These two cars were painted by a couple, Duster and Lizzie. And the first car is Wild Style. They both say Duster, Lizzie. And they're examples of lettering, because that's what graffiti really is. Some graffiti writers don't want to call it graffiti. They want to call it style writing. And that's a very apt description of it. The first Duster, Lizzie in blue and yellow, the blue background with yellow letters, is an example of what they would call straight letters. And the other one is wild style lettering. And these two cars were called a married couple because the numbers of the cars were consecutive. And they knew when they were painting them in the yards that they would run together as a pair. So meanwhile, as I had left the post, I had to try to get my career off the ground, and I wanted to have some exhibits of my my street play photos. And I proposed an exhibit to the Museum of the City of New York, and I got an exhibit. And this is how I met my first folklorist, because Barbara Kirschenblatt-Gimlet, known AKA BKG, who I'm sure people in this room have met and know her, and she has given a lecture, the same lecture here, called me or got in touch with me, and she saw this play exhibit, and she introduced me to folklorists. And she introduced me to Amanda Dargan and Steve Zeitlin, who at the time were just starting a folklore organization in New York City called City Lore. And my play pictures became the nucleus of a much larger play project where we documented all different kinds of play, including adult play. And it was an exhibit at the Museum of the City of New York. And through them, I met other folklorists. So I have to backtrack just a little bit here. While I was at the Post, I had been assigned to go to Washington Heights to photograph a riot. And when I got there, it turned out these little kids, they didn't let me take pictures, but I snuck the picture on the left, and you can see their young kids have been arrested by the cops. The cops are showing me what they had confiscated. But the cops said to me, well, they were fighting because they had been dancing, and they were fighting about who had won the dance battle. And the cops told me that they could spin on their heads. And that just sounded so amazing, so that when they released them, you can see we're right outside the police station in the subway. I asked them to show me what they had been doing, and this is what they showed me. And I thought this was amazing, and I called the Post, and I had them send a reporter, and they were totally uninterested because it wasn't a riot. Like, kids dancing didn't interest them, and they didn't publish these pictures. So I actually took these pictures with me when I left the Post. And so I thought this is really interesting. And I called a folklorist. I called Barbara Kirschenblatt-Gimlet. I said, I saw these little boys dancing, and they can spin on their heads. And she introduced me to Sally Baines, who was an amazing dance writer and critic. She said, Sally's your woman, talk to Sally. I called Sally, and for a year, Sally and I went around looking for this mysterious dance, which was, sometimes they called it rocking, breakdancing, b-boying. It took us a long time. And finally, these are all pictures. My friend Henry organized an event, and Sally was already writing for the Village Voice, and she wrote an amazing story for the Village Voice and describing the dance. And this is my pictures are the first pictures I don't know that anybody has ever taken earlier ones. If they have, I've never seen them. And certainly nobody ever wrote about breaking before this article. This article really introduced breaking to the world, and a lot of people saw it. And one of the persons who saw it was Nancy Gross here, apparently, and others who were organizing this folk culture of the Bronx. And we were invited by the organizers of this folk culture of the Bronx conference to bring dancers. And so we got the Rocksteady crew together. Here they are on a panel at the folk culture. And here they are demonstrating some of their moves, and look at the audience there. I think those are like 90% folklorists watching this. And then they adjourned to a roller rink and also demonstrated some of their other moves there. This was we split our honorarium among the crew. So this is we $5, $10, and you can see they tagged their names. So there was always this relationship between graffiti and breaking, and it eventually was sort of assimilated into hip hop. After that, there were like many things happened with this Rocksteady crew and breaking. This is an event at Lincoln Center. It was included in some of the early hip-hop movies like Wild Style. Charlie Ahern, who made Wild Style, asked the same kids, the Rocksteady crew, to be in it. Beat Street was a more commercial film and also included scenes of breaking. And promoters started to bring the kids into clubs in downtown New York. And here you have Keith Haring. He's in the blue shirt, and he was already considered kind of an arbiter of cool. And so the fact that he's showing up at this made it extremely cool. And I'm Marty, so this is something he signed for me, and he signed it with a little drawing of a breaker. And Keith had started hanging out with graffiti writers, and he started painting walls. And this is a very big wall on Houston Street that he painted. He moved all the trash bags. He's sort of painting pictures of breakers. But I regard this as the beginning of street art as opposed to graffiti, because he's not using letters. And so he was using it. He did not get permission for this wall, so he was appropriating public space the way graffiti writers do. And as a result, a lot of people started painting walls. And now I'm following walls all over the world. But back to the folklore. I met other folklorists and did other projects. This was one I did with Shelley Posen and Maxine Mixa. It was called Brooklyn Rediscovery, Making Brooklyn Home. And we documented all kinds of communities all over Brooklyn. This is one we did a lot with an Italian-American festival called the Giglio. And I found out how important it is when you're documenting this kind of an event to work with academics or folklorists, anthropologists, who can, one, get entree to the subjects, who do the research ahead of time, because this was a very complicated event, and who can make the appointments with the right people, who can write the captions afterwards. So there were many events that led up to the main event. Here you can see, of course, a lot of the pictures that I'm showing you now, perhaps these things don't happen anymore, but certainly when I was taking this picture, it would never have occurred to me that the World Trade Towers would not be here today in my lifetime. So you never know what you're getting in a picture that might disappear. We were always looking at how are traditions transmitted, and this is a good example, to see how kids are brought into different festivals. And this festival had an enormous tower called a Giglio that was lifted by many, mostly men in the community. It took a lot of pre-planning to figure out how to get there, where to stand, because the streets were packed with people. If you want to, say, get an aerial view, you have to sort of think about it in advance. And these were all things that folklorists really helped me do and would have been hard for me to do on my own. You can't go knocking on somebody's door in the middle of a festival and try to get up. I mean, you can, but it's very hard to get up to the roof. This is the climax of this particular festival. There was a float with a boat, and then there was a Giglio, and they meet in the middle of the street, and you had to kind of figure out which rooftop might be the best rooftop. I mean, now maybe you could do this with a drone, I don't have a drone, but I'm a little afraid of drones because I think I'll probably crash them. And also in New York City, you really need a license. It's not always legal to use a drone. But anyway, this took pre-planning, and the folklorists were really indispensable in getting me to the right place at the right time to take these pictures. And as a photographer, I mean, you have enough to worry about. And all of these pictures that I'm showing you so far were all taken on film. And remember, first of all, they're all taken on Kodachrome film. Kodachrome had this very low ISO, 64, only 36 frames on a roll. You're out there all day long carrying, cameras and lenses, and you have to decide, well, how many rolls of film? If you run out of film in the middle of the festival, you're out of luck, because you're not going to find Kodachrome in the drugstore. So as a photographer, I had a lot to worry about, but I didn't have to worry about getting to the right place at the right time, and that was important. So another project, a multi-year project that I worked on with a number of folklorists and academics, was called Las Casitas. The end product was a big exhibit in the Smithsonian, where we actually built the casita. But these little casitas were built all over New York City in vacant lots in the 80s. And they became cultural centers, gathering places, and transmission of culture places. So this is Rincon Criollo, which actually City Lure is now trying to get a cultural landmark status for. It's still in existence, but in a different place. But this is what it looked like. Wait a minute, I actually meant to show you. If you look, you can see there's an abandoned building right behind the casita. So again, I didn't have a drone. There were no drones at the time. I had to illegally enter this abandoned building and climb up to the roof in order to take this picture. And you can see the South Bronx at the time was just a devastated area. This is really the only sign of life in that neighborhood. So here we have some casita pictures. That's a cop scarecrow. Okay, I'm going on to another project. Now I'm in Chinese New Year's. So I went to a American Folklore conference, and I heard a talk by a folklorist named Madeline Slavenslow, and she talked about lion dancing and Chinese New Year's in New York, and how the shopkeepers set up sort of puzzles for the lion to negotiate, and then they gave them money in a red envelope. So this sounded really intriguing, and so Madeline and I, eventually it became a children's book, which is also over on that table. And Madeline and I went out, and again, I could not have done this. Well, here we're in a Kung Fu club in Chinatown. I had to set up lights to take this picture. Again, it was on Kodachrome. There's no way you can just get into a Kung Fu club in Chinatown without knowing somebody. And Madeline did all the field work, provided all the introductions, got me into the club, and of course went around with me. Here's an example. Here's a lion negotiating some upturned soup bowls to get to he has to eat that head of lettuce. Here's one. And mostly if you went to Chinatown and during Chinese New Year's, I mean, you would see these lions moving around, but there would be no way that you would really understand what they were doing. And that's what the difference between just going there and going there with a folklorist. I mean, Madeline paved the way and I was able to get some amazing pictures. So I also did some upstate folklore with Varric Chittenden, who started an organization called TANI, Traditional Arts in Upstate New York. And I think these are the kinds of things that, I mean, we did decoy carving and basket making and quilting. I think that's what most people think of when they think of folklore and folk art. But lucky for me, folklorists have a different point of view and embrace all kinds of artistic expressions. This was another project. Nancy Solomon started a folklore organization called Long Island Traditions, and this was a vernacular architecture project. There are these little houses built on islands in the bay that families were given permission, like many, many years ago, to build the houses, but the town of Hempstead had said that they couldn't repair the houses and they couldn't pass on the houses, and so the houses were going to be destroyed. And Nancy was trying to save these houses, and we traveled all over taking pictures of them. And finally, here is a project I did for the Library of Congress on working in Paterson. And I don't have these pictures, they have the pictures, and I took these are screenshots that they're my pictures, but screenshots from the Library of Congress website. But when I looked at them, I mean, I really do wonder if any of these machines are still operating in Paterson, even though it wasn't so long ago. When was it? 1994. I mean, to me, this looks so old-fashioned. It was like everything I've shown you so far has been pre-computer age. And I'm just sure that if we went back to Paterson, we would find completely different machinery, if we found any at all. This was the folklorist here was David Taylor. There's a picture of him on the bottom slide, and he directed it. So the folklore organization that I've done the most work with is City Lore in New York City. And one of our biggest projects was after 9/11. We documented the memorials that sprang up. And of course, we made an effort to try to get all the different responses from many different ethnic communities that we could find. And this eventually became an exhibit at the New York Historical Society. I mean, for example, these at Halloween. Halloween was October. Remember, 9/11 was September. Halloween was October. They, just 1 month later, they made this costume of the trade towers with wings, and you can see it here in the exhibit. We were able to contact them and collect the costume, and that's our team below. The exhibit was called Missing. So this next project is a project that I did entirely on my own. I'm from Baltimore, and I decided I wanted to get back to doing some street photography in my hometown. And Sally, who's here, cousin Sally, drove me around looking for a neighborhood that I thought would work, and I picked Holland's Market. And I introduced myself to the community by having a graffiti mural painted. The neighborhood was called Sowebo for Southwest Baltimore. And I asked the graffiti writer to paint a mural. And every year there's a festival, Sowebo Festival. And I set up this mural, and I offered free photos to people as using the mural as a backdrop. The guy who painted it is on the upper right corner, Adam Stab, well-known Baltimore graffiti writer. So that was my entree to this community. And I made more than 200 trips by bus from New York City to Baltimore to work on this project. And it's my own private folklore project, even though I didn't have a folklorist to help me. But I just walked around the neighborhood. People used to call me the picture lady because I would give them back photographs. And these are the kinds of things that an Arabber with his son. This is a very Baltimore tradition. If you've never heard of it, they call themselves Arabbers with the horse cart. Like here, kids eating crabs on the street. not something you would find in a lot of places. I was, a decorated house at Easter time. Like these are tire planters on the right. So I photographed it for 10 years. Took me 10 years to do this project in a very destitute neighborhood. This is the neighborhood of The Wire, if you've ever watched The Wire. But there was a lot of life, a lot of community life. This is 4th of July, fireworks at night, Halloween. It actually snows in Baltimore. And I was looking for this kinds of traditions that folklorists had showed me were interesting. For example, in that neighborhood at Christmas time, people put wrapping paper on their door. And after I had been working for a few years on Soweto, I was invited to South Africa. And Soweto was named after Soweto. It was a nickname that somebody gave it. And I went to Soweto, and I felt that it looked a lot like Soweto. So I began to do a comparative study. And I wound up making like 3 or 4 more trips to Soweto. And you can see in these pictures, each set of pictures, one is Baltimore and one is Soweto. So, and these are just pictures of everyday life. In both places, but there were remarkable similarities. On the left, they're like cooking meat on the street. On the right, he's cooking crabs on the street. So getting back to Subway Art. Subway Art was published in 1984. I never expected this kind of art form to travel around the world. I always thought I was photographing something that could only be found in New York City. I was completely wrong about that. It has spread across the world, and Subway Art has been credited with spreading it. Here we are in Russia. This is in South Africa. This is in Romania. And I don't know if you can read it, but what he's writing on the train is my name. It says Martha. Look closely. You can make out the letters. And I was invited by the notorious One Up crew in Berlin to make a book with them. And we did do a book. It's called 1 Week with One Up. It's all illegal graffiti. You can see on this piece they put an MC for me. This is the book. I took that picture. We're in a subway station that was still working with running trains here. It's using a fire extinguisher to paint. This is a mural they painted for me. You can see in the background. So now I've been traveling all over the world shooting mostly street art. It's amazing how many festivals there are. This is a festival. I went to Tahiti for graffiti festivals 3 times. And the Tahitian government sponsors these festivals. And this is on the right, you can see there's a stamp. This is actually a government-sponsored stamp this is a sheet of stamps with a hand with a spray can. I mean, they've embraced graffiti. This is Mongolia. Maya Hayek painted this as the community center of Mongolia. This was at a festival called Festigraph in Senegal. They don't always paint walls. This was a fishing village in Brazil, in northern Brazil, at another festival. This is China. This is St. Petersburg, Russia. You can see classic graffiti. He's holding a says Wild Style, which is directly from New York City. And I was able to go back to Haiti with a street artist, and I was really happy to see the kids were still making their own toys, although now all the toys that I saw were plastic and not metal. So there had been a change. Beijing, this was Estonia, and this was a festival that was called Mextonia, where the festival organizers brought Mexican street artists to Estonia. And you can see here the Mexicans are on one side, the Estonians are on the other, and somebody is doing a breaking move in the street. But I just am showing you this because I'm still photographing all the same kind of folklore events as always. And they're mixed in now with some street art events. This was a very elaborate event in Valencia, Spain. Street artists made that sculpture, which was later completely burnt. And this, Kingraph, Sally and I, just went this year to Congo. And Kingraph was a festival in Congo, and they were doing both graffiti and street art on walls in Kinshasa. Which is, it's just to me amazing that this has traveled the way it has. I don't think there's any country in the world that doesn't have some form of New York graffiti in it. So I've been flattered that a number of street artists have used my photographs for their work. This is a picture, this is the boy that introduced me to graffiti, and the work is by Gaia in Baltimore. There's a permanent, this was a street play picture, and it's permanently on the right-hand side on a building in Brooklyn. And this is Shepard Fairey, who did the Obama poster, putting up a very large wheat paste of that picture of the kids that I showed you earlier, that were in the abandoned building in the late 70s. And this is Lady Aiko, who did a wall based on one of my tattoo photos. And this is a picture of a book that I did about early hip hop, and I see this particular image all over the place. I've seen many, many different examples. So I just recently, like last month, traveled to Brazil. Red Bull brought me to Brazil to take pictures of. This was a flip-flop battle, and this is a Brazilian photographer. Showed me that she has a portrait, and I'd never met her or heard of her before. She has a portrait of me tattooed on her arm, which I guess is the ultimate compliment. That was a little surprising. And okay, this picture of Spray Nation, this is my latest book, and it just launched yesterday, so I felt like I had to mention it. You can get it online. There is a copy of it over here. It's all my old graffiti pictures, but unpublished, previously unpublished graffiti pictures. And that's it. So, how did we, okay? No, if we have time, fine.
Hi, thank you for being here. I'm a hip hop head, like a diehard hip hop head. Thinking about DJ K Slay, he just passed away, and before he passed, he had a chance to reconnect with you. Do you have any pleasant memories, or just going down memory lane about Dez or DJ K Slay?
Well, I went into the yard. He was one of the first people to take me into the yards, and unfortunately, I didn't include any pictures of him here, but one of my favorite of all time pictures, and I think it is in subway art, is of him with this baseball bat in the yard. So, I mean, he was a very friendly guy, but when we went to the yards, he took this bat in case we met anybody. So, I mean, when I think of him, I always think of that photograph. But then I reconnected, like, recently. I mean, he's just a great guy, and it's sad. I mean, he died of COVID, right? So that's, yeah, too bad.
Thank you, Marty. That was awesome. You mentioned shooting on Kodachrome and with film, and now I'm assuming you shoot digitally. Has how you seek photos changed with the technology? Do you shoot more now? Or are you as selective?
People are always thinking that I'm gonna be sad about film. I love digital. For me, digital is so much easier than film. I like everything about it. You can balance the light better. You can shoot at much higher ISO. I'm shooting at 2000 ISO. It handles low light much better. I can see if I'm making a mistake when I'm shooting. I mean, remember with film, you sent your film in, especially Kodachrome. It had to be developed by Kodak. So you send it away, and 2 days later it would come back, and you found out that you completely overexposed it or underexposed it, and never any chance to go back and get those pictures. And now you can look exactly as you're shooting and adjust if you're making a mistake. And so for that, I shoot? I probably shoot more, because I used to think that it cost me about 50 cents every time I press the shutter for the film and the developing. And, I don't even think about, am I shooting too much? I just shoot whatever I need to shoot, and I don't worry about it, because you can reuse the cards. It doesn't cost you any more to shoot anymore. So, plus, I should say, I like to be able to, I used to have to send a Kodachrome away, come back, it was a slide, there wasn't a lot you could do with it. It was hard to get it printed. Now I can adjust I can edit my pictures. I can make little areas lighter and darker, and I like that.
Hi, Martha. Good to see you. Did you ever shoot medium or large format, or has it always been 35 millimeter?
Well, did you see that picture at the beginning of
I
us
did.
with our roll
I
of
did.
flex?
I saw that one, but
that was the last time.
that was it.
Yeah.
Okay.
What are you looking forward to in the future? What's next for you?
Well, immediately what's next is September 18th, I'm going to Florence, Italy to shoot a project called GAP. It's graffiti art in prison. And a graffiti writer in Florence has organized this. And I'm really looking forward to, I have absolutely no idea what it's going to be. He's going to teach prisoners in Florence how to do graffiti. So that's one thing I'm looking forward to. I have a show. The next street art event that I'm going to is in Kansas. And I thought that was kind of interesting, because I hadn't really heard of any street art in the Midwest. So I'm looking forward. That's in October. I'm looking forward to that. So.
Sure. What happened to the boy who first introduced you to graffiti?
He's still around, and it's kind of sad. He was in prison for 15 years for drug dealing, which probably wasn't very serious drug dealing. And I see him occasionally, because I take pictures when they repaint that same wall that Keith Haring painted is still getting painted now about every 3 or 4 months. And he still lives on the Lower East Side, and he usually comes around. But nothing much happened with him. I don't really know too much about his life, but I don't think he wasn't able to do anything with his art. I know that. But he's still alive.
Has the New York Post ever done an article about you?
No.
That needs to be corrected.
I don't really want them to know that I took those early breaking pictures. And also a lot of that street play picture, those street play pictures, I kind of took the negatives, but mostly they hadn't published them, they hadn't used them, so don't tell them that.
Um, what kind of camera do you use nowadays?
A Nikon 850, I guess it is. I use a digital Nikon camera with about 3 lenses, like wide, medium, long. I've always used Nikon equipment, but Nikon has never supported me. Just put that out there, you know.
Hi. Did you ever document any racking missions while you were out?
Maybe you have to explain what a racking mission is. I mean, I know it. Do you know what a racking? I mean, we're talking about like procuring paint was always interesting because graffiti writers didn't pay for their paint. So there are all kinds of stories about how they managed to acquire like multi-cans of paint in one fell swoop by having all kinds of special clothing with pockets and things. But no, I never was able to. I didn't. Is that what you meant by racking mission? Yeah. No, never took a picture of that. Heard a lot of stories.
And in New York City, after a while, spray paint was locked up, right?
Yes. So kids actually would go out to New Jersey. I did, and I mean, color was, first of all, you couldn't really get a lot of colors of spray paint. And when a company came out with a new color, that kids would hear about it and they'd go try to get that particular color. And also there might be some odd brand that they heard had a color like sandalwood. I remember somebody, and they knew if you went out to New Jersey in some town, some store might have sandalwood. And I did hear about kids, really going to great lengths to procure a particular color. I mean, remember when you went to the yards, you had a plan, and that plan, often the sketch would actually have the colors marked on it. So you needed to decide, you had to carry those colors into the yard to make sure. And I do have pictures in subway art. You can see if you ran out of black might be a color that you wanted to outline the letters. The piece wouldn't be finished, and it wasn't as if you could go back the next night and finish it. That train would not be parked in the same place. And so there's a page in the original subway art, the one that you brought me, and now I guess we don't have a copy here, but there's of excuses that they wrote, sorry, ran out of black, that kind of thing. Or one was like, the wind fucked us up. And,
Do you want to just say a few things about getting into the yards at that point?
Well, I mean, it wasn't even always yards. Sometimes it was tunnels. Like there were various. Sometimes through a hole in a fence you could get into a yard, but also through a manhole cover, you could go down into a tunnel where there were layups. It was all actually rather scary. Yeah, because when you got into the yard, I mean, the trains were making noises, and there's a third rail that's electrified, and there could be rival crews in the yard, and
And official yard people also.
And official yard people, correct.
Yeah.
I didn't get it. I wish I had, because it would make a very good story, but I didn't.
But other people did. I think we have time for one more question, please.
Hey, how you doing,
Hi.
Martha Cooper? Just a, kind of like a statement, but a question as well. You're giving a lecture, right, in the Congress Library of graffiti.
I know.
So a bunch of people that probably, a lot of them probably wouldn't like to see graffiti. You know what I'm saying? So, have you seen a change in that since the 80s? I've been a writer since I was 11, and the struggle still continues because we're differentiating street art from graffiti.
Yes, definitely.
So, which I love both, but to present that to the people, to get them to think outside of the box of what we're doing. Have you seen a change in that, a growth?
Yeah, I mean, it used to be graffiti was a totally underground activity, and people really did not know what it was, and certainly never thought it was as organized. I mean, that graffiti writers were designing their pieces, were planning missions. I don't think most people understood that at all. And I have seen a change, but there's still an unwillingness for contemporary art museums to look at graffiti as art. And there are some incredible pieces out there. I'm talking about, we're not talking street art now. That's graffiti pieces, graffiti lettering. And I don't understand these museums, that it's like there's a blindness that they're not I mean, the color combinations, the skill, like try painting with spray paint. It's completely difficult. And you know, they have different kinds of caps that go on the can so that you can make wide spray or little tiny lines. And the skill that some of these writers have in doing these pieces, and they can do it quickly, is extraordinary. So, you know, I'm telling you here, and I'm hoping you'll look at it with a new eye when you leave here, and maybe tell your friends. I think that curators I mean, what could be more contemporary art than graffiti? To me, it definitely ought to be included. And while Haring is included, Basquiat is included in these museums, you do not generally see hardcore graffiti writers in museums today, and I hope that will change in my lifetime. Okay.
Right. Thank you so much, Martha Cooper. Thank you for coming to the Library of Congress.
Thank you, Nancy, for having me and for getting us a parking spot.
Okay.
That was big.
Duly noted. Thank you.